morning. Especially sorry for this technical issue. So it's a great honor to have Dr. Zhijie, Sasha being here as our guest speaker. Sasha obtained his bachelor degree from Nanjing University and his master degree from Columbia University and his PhD from Cornell University in 2015. And her work is basically in mathematical modeling and stochastic programming for transportation and civil infrastructure and disaster relief optimization. So today she will be talking about a multi-stage stochastic programming model for relief distribution considering the state of road network.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for inviting me here. So this is a paper we just published on Transportation Research Part B. So just in case I did not explain this paper very clearly, but you are interested in you're welcome to ask me any questions, or you can just check the paper online. Okay. So this paper is a joint work with Dr. Xiaolong Hu, who is my postdoc associate at Texas State University, Dr. Han from Tongji University, and Dr. Meng from Shanghai Maritime University. This is the outline for today's presentation. First, I will give you a brief introduction about my research work in the disaster relief, particularly the background for this paper. And then I'll just review some relevant papers and like to describe what kind of research gaps we want to fill. And then I'll introduce how we construct the model, how we construct the problem using a stochastic programming model, and then what kind of solution methodology we use to solve this NP-hard problem. And then we propose a case study based on Yaan earthquake in China to validate the proposed model as well as the algorithm. And then at the end, I'll conclude my presentation by summarizing the major contributions we have made in this paper, as well as propose some research directions for future work. Before I start, I just want to introduce my school a little bit. I come from Texas State University. I guess probably most of people don't know where it is because we have too many universities in Texas. So Texas State is in San Marcos. It's in the middle between Austin and San Antonio. So we're about like 30 or 40 miles away from Austin. Like I guess probably a little bit longer than the distance from like Washington D.C. to here. But like most of the faculties, if we have families, we live in Austin. So we commute to school every day. And we have the engineering school like 10 years ago. And right now, we don't have industry engineering department yet. We only have industry engineering program. We have electrical engineering program. And we have 4 programs so far, and all of them are in engineering school right now. So although it is called school, actually it is a department so far. For our industry engineering program, we have 5 faculties. I'm like the newest one who do the research in logistics and transportation. We have faculty doing research in manufacturing engineering, in energy, and also in industrial engineering education. All right, so this is a map from NOAA about billionary dollar disasters of 2017 in the United States. I like this map a lot because 2017 was the coldest year on record for natural disasters in the United States. And the total loss of economy is at least 306 billion. Can anyone remember what kind of disasters we had like 2 years ago? So Hurricane Harvey. That's the time I just started working at Texas State. So I remember the first few days when the school was closed actually for a few days just because of Hurricane Harvey. And that was the year we have a lot of funding for natural disasters. So when a disaster happens, we need to prepare a lot of relief items to the victim to satisfy their demand. And most of the time, the relief items are actually not insufficient to help the survivors. So we need to come up with a plan that we can deliver these items as soon as possible, and we can deliver like enough items as much as we can. There are usually 2 ways to solve this problem. One is called pre-positioning. It is kind of strategy. You will forecast what will happen in the future. Then you will store some items there for when a disaster happens, then you can transport these supplies to victims. The other we call post-disaster distribution. Then we focus more on how we can deliver these items efficiently to victims. So such kind of distribution highly depends on the availability of vehicle fleets. And also the decisions sometimes cannot work because the infrastructure is just disrupted. So if we think about pre-positioning strategy, if the road cannot work, then it is useless to store sufficient relief supplies. Okay, and we need to pay extra money for the warehouse for the storage. But if we cannot deliver this relief item very efficiently, then there is no meaning to pre-position many items there. Therefore, it is very essential to integrate fleet decisions and the state of transportation infrastructure into relief distribution. We identify several challenges when we talk about distribution plan. The first challenge is the number of vehicles are actually vary, and also the rental costs vary. For most relief agencies, they don't own any vehicles. They rent the vehicles from business companies like FedEx, UPS, and also some trucking companies. So they need to pay money to rent these trucks or any other vehicles. Then the cost will depend on the current situation, whether they have enough trucks or what time you need these trucks. So the rental costs actually vary. The other challenge is the state of road network also vary. When we use mathematical model to optimize, system, there is one big challenge is most of the time the mathematical models is too optimal. It is kind of infeasible for the real world application. And this is one issue that is related to this problem. Because the road network, sometimes, for example, if a earthquake, it will disrupt the routes. So in that case, we cannot just assume we can deliver the trucks on that route. So that's another big challenge. Motivated by these challenges, in this paper, we actually want to study a stochastic post-disaster distribution problem so that we can respond to disasters more efficiently. And here I have some pictures to give you an idea about the secondary disasters. That's the key part we want to focus on in this paper when we talk about the uncertainty of the disaster. So, for example, if it is earthquake, its secondary disaster could be another small earthquake, or could be landslides, or could be flooding. So when a secondary disaster happens, so let's say usually when a major disaster happens, if it is, for example, it's an earthquake, volunteer will go there, try to recover the routes. But then a secondary disaster happens. They will damage a part of the route again. So it will damage recovered or recovering segments of the road network. Then the road capacity is actually changing. There is a lot of uncertainties there, and these uncertainties are caused actually by the secondary disasters, as well as the major disaster also. So here are some literature review we have done. We divide the literature review into 3 streams. The first stream is about the multiple use of vehicles. Of course, there are many literature that they work on how to deliver the items efficiently to the affected regions. But most of this literature, they just focus on ground transportation. They assume that we use trucks to deliver the items. And the typical way to do that is they take it as a vehicle routing problem. And all this work, they ignore the issue of road availability. There are some other works that they do consider the use of multiple types of vehicles, such as helicopters. This is because when a road is disrupted, we cannot send trucks there. We have to use other transportation modes, such as helicopters. But for these works, they ignore the fluctuation of rental costs of vehicles. They do not consider, the cost of using the helicopter. They just care about how can we deliver the items there. The second stream is about the state of road network. When we talk about disaster, uncertainty is one of our priorities, and many studies do consider the the difference, like the changing state of road network, but they describe this uncertainty indirectly. When I say indirectly, I mean they use transportation time, distance, or cost to reflect the state of road network. And some studies, they try to describe it directly using decision variables. And most decision variables are actually binary. So it means that if the value of the decision variables are 1, then it means that this route is accessible. We can send tracks there. If it is 0, then this route is disrupted, so there's no way to get there from point A to point B. So obviously, these are two extreme situations. And we have some states in the middle, between, which means that although we cannot reach to the full capacity of the road, but we are still able to send some trucks there. So that is the changing state of the road network. And to the best of our knowledge, we only found one paper which used integer variables to describe the state of arms. But it ignored the variation of road capacity over time, and I'll explain how we try to describe the variation of the road capacity later on. So this table actually summarizes what I just explained about most relevant studies related to the use of multiple types of vehicles and the variation of network capacity. The last stream of literature is about progressive hedging algorithm, aka PHA. We use this algorithm to solve the proposed model. And the relevant work can be divided into 3 categories. The first one is just how to use this algorithm. It can be used in many different fields as long as you have some uncertainties you want to work with. So it can be used in supply chain management, can be used in healthcare, and it can be used in harvest planning. The second category is about enhance this algorithm by adjusting penalty parameters. There are many strategies that we can adjust the penalty parameters, so it is more methodological. And the last category is about improve the algorithm by integrating other algorithms such as grouping method, do decomposition, and simple average approximation. All right, so this paper shows how we model our problem. So we consider a transshipment network. When we say a transshipment, it means that we have some warehouses there. We do not allow the items to be shipped directly from the suppliers to the demand locations. They have to be collected and stored at the warehouses first. And then we consolidate everything and then send to affected locations. And we only consider one transshipment level, which is local warehouse. It means that these warehouses are actually located in the disaster affected regions. And there are 3 levels in this network. The first level is supply level. So suppliers provide and they can even produce the relief supplies we need for the victims. And usually they are located in other states, which are relatively far away from the affected locations. So we assume that the disaster actually will not affect where the supplies are. The second level is transshipment level. They are local warehouses. They are determined before a disaster happens, and then we will decide how many items we will store there, and how many items will ship from warehouses to different demand locations. And then the last level is called demand level. Is actually the disaster affected regions. So we have victims, survivors there. We need to accommodate them as much as possible. So when we talk about the uncertainty of road capacity, it actually happens in the local distribution part, because that is where the disasters are. Okay. So there are 2 parts of the transportation. The first part is long distance transportation. We'll try to get items from supplies to local warehouses, and the vehicles we can use include airplanes and trains because of the long distance, and also because of the large volumes of the items. The second part is called local distribution. So usually we use trucks. Most of the time we use the trucks, but it depends on the state of the road network. If it is disrupted, we will use helicopters. And we use a scenario tree to describe the uncertainty in road capacity. And here is an example of scenario tree. This scenario tree has 3 stages and 10 scenarios. So each stage denotes a time interval. So when we say a time interval, it could be hours, days, and months. And in our problem, we make the decision every day, like based on an earthquake disaster. So the stage here is actually just denotes a day. And each stage contains several nodes. If it is first stage, we assume that it only contains one node, which is current situation. Okay, and for other stages, it can contain multiple nodes. Each node, they denote a possible realization of the capacity of the road network with a specific probability. And there are arcs linked from one scenario to the other, and they denote the direction of scenarios for the next stage. So we know that after scenario 1 happens, then scenario 2 will happen, or scenario 3 will happen, or scenario 4 will happen. This is kind of parent-child scenario relationship, and we use a function sheet to represent its relationship. And we can say that scenario 1 is the parent scenario of scenario 2, 3, 4. Okay, yeah, this is about the scenario tree. And we also have some assumptions about the modeling. The first assumption we assume is the long-distance transportation network is unaffected by the disaster, and I already explained earlier. The second assumption we have is detour is not considered because multiple roads between 2 locations may not always exist. It means that if point A to point B, if the road from point A to point B is disrupted, we will not send trucks anyway. We will use helicopters instead. And we don't have like a detour from point A to point C and then back to point B. We just want to find the shortest path as we can. And the third assumption we have is the demand for supplies is steady. This is because the major uncertainty we consider here is secondary disasters. And the influence of secondary disaster is about the road capacity. It will not create much more demands for the supplies. So we assume that the supply for supplies is steady.
So does it mean there's no temporal component in the model?
It means that the demand is given.
So you mean the demand is not uncertain? It's deterministic, it's fixed?
Yes, the demand is deterministic. We will not consider, when a secondary disaster happens, we will not consider there will be more demand. Because
is there a time component also in demand? Does demand changes from time period to time period?
That's the part we do not consider in the model.
Okay.
So we assume that the demand will be known when the disaster happens. We know like how many victims.
And it's just like for this location, just that's how many
yes.
I don't know, syringes they need, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay,
That's
just one number.
Yes.
Okay.
That's what I mean here. The demand for supplies is steady.
And what is long distance transportation network?
Sorry, what?
Long distance transportation network?
Long distance transportation network is unaffected.
What is long distance?
It's from one state to another. Let's say if the hurricane happens in Houston, probably we'll need some food from Arkansas or Louisiana.
Interstate highways?
Yes.
Okay.
So and this transportation will not be affected by disaster because they are far away from the affected regions.
I see.
So that, and if you go back to see this figure, when we consider the uncertainty capacity, it only occurs here in local distribution. All right. So any other questions? All right. And then we use a multi-stage stochastic programming model to describe this problem. So in the first stage, as I mentioned, we only assume there is one scenario node, which represents the first day when a disaster happens. And we assume the demand is 0 in the first day because the disaster just happened. And in the first stage, we want to figure out where to locate the temporary warehouses. And at the end of each stage, including the first stage, we also want to determine the maximum number of vehicles we can have, different types of vehicles we can have for the next stage. And at the beginning of each stage, excluding the first stage, we want to figure out how we assign vehicles to deliver supplies from suppliers to warehouses and then to affected regions. Here are the stats and the indices for the modeling, and I want to emphasize several of them. Set A is a set of item types. So we consider 3 different types of relief items in this model based on their attributes. The first type of item is something like meal, water that everyone needs in a timely way. And the second type of items is blankets, like tents, that they are also necessities, but not that urgent. And also people can share, like 3 or 4 people can stay in one tent. And the third type of items we consider is medical supplies. Not everyone needs medical supplies because not everyone gets injured in the disasters. So there are 3 major types of relief items we consider. And set O and set P represents different vehicle types. Set O is for long distance distribution. Set P is for local distribution. And we use airplane and train for long distance transportation, and we use helicopters and trucks for local distribution. And set air is actually the quantity intervals. When we work with stochastic programming models for disaster, there is a very common way we use is to discretize. So the set air here is actually we discretize the number of vehicles for our model. For example, quantity interval 1 represents 20 vehicles we can use. Interval 2 represents 40 vehicles we can use. Although the number of vehicles is continuous, but we discretize the numbers into different intervals. And I'll show the input data later so you can have a better sense about how the intervals looks like. And these are the parameters we have. And this is the decision variables. And you can tell that only WK is the decision variables we need to make at the first beginning. So it is not related to the scenario. WK is a binary decision variable indicating whether warehouse K is selected. And for other decision variables like XS, XW, YS, and QS, QW, they are all scenario specific, which means that in different scenarios they will have different values. It depends on the probability that when disaster happens, and also depends on the load capacity under that scenario. And this is our object function, which is to minimize the cost. There are several parts consisting of this cost. So the first part is rental cost. The second part is transportation cost. So for both rental and transportation costs, they are long distance transportation and local distribution transportation. And also we have handling cost. So handling cost here is the cost that we need to handle the additional part of the items. So for each warehouse, they have a capacity, and once the items we need to store at the warehouse exceeds the capacity, we need additional label, we need additional equipment to handle these items. That's a part of handling cost that we consider. And penalty cost is the cost for the demand that we cannot satisfy. And we divide the constraints into several groups. The first group is to locate the warehouse. The second group is to allocate the vehicles. We also add the constraint that the number of vehicles used under current scenario is fewer than the quantity of available vehicles under its corresponding current scenario, and that's the constraints 10 and 11 represent. We have the flow constraints to make sure that it does not exist the capacity of that road. And we have some constraints to calculate the inventory because we have a part called the handling cost to deal with the inventory. And we have a set of constraints to calculate the unsatisfied demand That's also important component in our cost object function, the cost in the object function. And last is a bunch of constraints to describe the decision variables. So for such kind of a problem, it is a bit hard, and the size of problem increases very fast when the number of scenario goes up. So it will be more efficient if we use heuristic algorithm rather than commercial solver like Simplex or Groovy. So the algorithm we adopt here is called progressive hedging algorithm. There are usually two ways to solve stochastic programming models. One way is to decompose the problem based on stages like L-shaped method. The other is like scenario-based decomposition like progressive hedging here. So the basic idea behind the progressive hedging is to decompose the problem based on scenarios into a bunch of sub-problems, and these sub-problems are deterministic. So once you, when we get the deterministic version, it means that we actually relax the non-anticipativity constraints. And once we solve these deterministic sub-problems, we will check whether these non-anticipative constraints are satisfied. If not, we will update some relevant parameters and go back to solve these sub-problems. And the algorithm will stop until the non-anticipativity constraints are satisfied. So here, figure 4 shows that how we actually work on the scenario tree. If we want to apply PHA, we have to disaggregate the scenario tree. This is a static form, then we disaggregate it into a disaggregated form. So here we have an idea called scenario sequence. A sequence.
How large are those trees in practical applications?
How large is what?
How large are those trees? How many leaves you have? How many? Yeah. What's the depth of the tree?
So we consider. So in the case study I'll show later, we consider 16 scenarios. That's for a case study, but to test the efficiency of the algorithm, we actually increase the number of scenarios to 40, 60.
But you can solve this naively, right? Just take any scenario and solve any scenario.
I'll show you some numbers when we use Simplex instead of progressive hedging. You can see that like it will be out of memory if we use Simplex.
Just for 40 scenarios?
I think you have lots of variable when you do variables involved. So
it will take a lot of time to just solve one sub-problem. So, okay, so a scenario sequence is actually a path from the root scenario all the way to the scenario in the last stage. So here in this small example, we have 6 scenario sequences. And we have another concept called bundle, scenario bundle B. So the first index is the index for the scenario sequence. So 1 here is the first scenario sequence, 2 here is the second scenario sequence, and the second index is actually for the stage. So 2 here means the second stage. Okay. So when 2 or more scenarios share the same scenario realization at the same stage, we will see that they have the same scenario bundle. So here we can see that for the first scenario sequence and for the second scenario sequence, they both share scenario 2 at the second stage. So we would see that they have the same scenario bundle and the value is 2. And this is a non-anticipativity constraint I mentioned. If we want to convert the model into a deterministic version first. And the typical way we deal with this constraint is to use augmented Lagrange relaxation. So we have penalized parts in the object function, and this part is quadratic, which we don't like. When we talk about optimization, we usually like to say the linear constraint or linear object function. So here is the strategy we use. If the decision variables are binary, we can linearize the quadratic penalty components by absolute value. But remember, I mentioned that one contribution of our work is actually we use integer decision variables rather than binary decision variables. So this way does not work. We have to introduce additional decision variables, OS, OS prime, OW, and OW prime here to linearize the quadratic part. And the second strategy we use is called variable fixing. This is because when we use progressive hedging, one common challenge is it works very efficiently at the first beginning. It converges very quickly, but then it takes many iterations to solve each sub-problem. So we would like to use variable fixing to kind of help the algorithm converge faster. So here, the decision variable WK is the probability indicating whether warehouse K is selected or not. And we give the algorithm a threshold called sigma. When the WK hat has a high value, it represents that the warehouse K will be selected for most of the scenarios. So if WK hat, its value is greater than or equal to the threshold for many iterations, we will ask the algorithm just push the value of WK to 1 so that we can get optimal solution faster. And this is the implementation of this algorithm for our model. And we use a case study to test our proposed model. So this case study is based on Yaan earthquake in China. We picked this example as a case study for two reasons. First, it is a very classical example of secondary disasters. There are a lot of small earthquakes happened on April 22nd, 2 days after the Yaan earthquake happened. The second reason is the data is relatively easy to obtain. There is a China earthquake database available online. So to use this case study, we assume that we have 10 suppliers located in other provinces or other states. And then we assume that there are 9 locations that needs the relief items. They are in the earthquake affected regions. And out of these 9 locations, there are 6 locations that can be considered as possible locations for those temporary warehouses. This is because these 6 locations are near the highway, so we are able to send trucks there. And we assume that although there are 6 possible locations, we only consider we need 2 temporary warehouses and 3 types of supplies. And I already explained what kind of 3 types of supplies we will consider. So for type 1, type 3, type 1 is like meal and water. Type 3 is like medical supplies. We define that the demand for 1 person as 1 unit. For type 2, because type 2 item is something like tents, people can share, so we define that the demand for 4 people is actually 1 unit of this type of supply items. And the demand for type 3 items, type 3 item is the medical supplies. So again, not everyone needs medical supplies if they are safe and sound. So the demand for type 3 item is assumed to be 1/8 of the affected population. So here, table 2 demonstrates the 9 locations we considered and its population and demand for different types of supplies. And this is the scenario tree we use for this case study. We assume that there are 16 scenarios with 3 stages. And the second stage, there are 5 scenarios. We define that, actually based on a literature, we define that there are 4 types of secondary disasters: catastrophe, major, moderate, and minor. So they are scenarios 2, 3, 4, and 5. And scenario 6 is a normal situation. It means that no secondary disaster happens. And once the first round of secondary disaster happens, it is possible that we will have a second round. So, but usually the second round of secondary disasters is relatively minor. So we assume that scenarios 7, 9, 11, 13, 15 are scenarios that are moderate. For other scenarios in stage 3, they are normal distribution, which means that there is no secondary disaster happen again in the third stage. And also we apply several rules when we determine the probability of occurrence. Based on the real situation in Yaan earthquake, we assume that the capacity of routes to affect the locations 3, 4, and 5 is 0. And I'll show a map later so that you know where locations 3, 4, and 5 are. And we assume that for the same stage, the network capacity of theory scenario is smaller than that of unserious scenario. And it is very intuitive that because, for example, here, scenario 2 and scenario 4, 2 is catastrophic disaster, 4 is moderate, so we assume that the road capacity here is smaller than the road capacity here. This is because more roads will be damaged by disasters. The third assumption we have made is the road capacity for the child scenario is larger than the road capacity of the parent scenario. This is because the volunteers are working there try to recover the roads, and the level of the secondary disaster usually is not as serious as the previous disasters. So the road capacity is actually increasing by the help of volunteers. So that's the assumptions we have. And we have some input parameters for the model. Table 3 and Table 4 shows the quantities of vehicles for each quantity interval, and as well as its associated rental cost. And this is a part I mentioned earlier, that how we discretize the continuous number of vehicles. In general, the larger index we have for the interval, the more vehicles we can rent for this type of fleet. And also for the rental cost, we assume that the more you need to rent, the more you need to pay in terms of unit cost. This is because we are in an urgent situation, so usually we are in short of fleets. The more you want to rent, the more you need to pay, okay? And another assumption is for the scenario. So here, scenario 1 represents the first stage, scenarios 2 to 4 represent the second stage, and scenarios 7 to 11 represent the third stage. So the first stage means the disaster just happened, it's in an urgent situation. The lead time is very short. So if we want to hire more fleets, we need to pay more for the rental cost. Once the disaster happened, let's say for a few days already, then the situation is not that urgent anymore, then the rental cost decreases. And this is some other input estimates. And this is some results we got from the case study. I just want to show you those are the supplies I mentioned in other provinces. And these are the 9 demand locations in the earthquake affected regions. And the solution picks 2 locations for temporary warehouses. One is in location 1, the other is in location 7. And location 1 serves the demand in these regions, and location 7 serves the demand in these regions. And this is, I just picked several scenarios, scenarios 2 and scenario 8. Here you can look at some details about how the fleets are located for the local distribution. And if you remember, scenario 8 is the child scenario of scenario 2. So you can tell that at the beginning, based on the real situation in Yaan earthquake, we assume that the road capacity of location 3, 4, 5 are 0. So we are not able to send any trucks there. We have to use helicopters. But once the road is being recovered, we are able to send a few trucks to satisfy the demands in that region. And here is more detailed solution. I don't think I have time to go over it today, but just want to show you that, for example, for stage 2, scenario 3 is more severe than scenario 4, which means that we have smaller road capacity. So if you look at the number of vehicles we can use, it is also fewer than the number of vehicles we can use in scenario 4. We also have conducted several sensitive analysis regarding the handling capacity, unit penalty cost, rental cost, and so on and so forth. And this is the table to represent the performance of simplex and progressive hedging algorithm. And you can tell that, so here K is the number of temporary warehouses we will pick. In the case study, we only assume there are 2 temporary warehouses, but here for the computational experiments, we use 6, 7. And S is the number of scenarios. We use 40, 50, 60 scenarios. And we can compare the upper bound and lower bound that simplex can obtain, and we set up the maximum number of computation time for simplex is 1 hour. Okay, and we can see that this heuristic algorithm purpose of hedging, it can obtain a very good quality solution within a very reasonable time. And here are some managerial insights we obtained from the computational experiments. And to summarize the major contribution of the research work I present today. So the first thing is we consider multiple use, the use of multiple types of fleets, including airplanes, trains, trucks, and helicopters. And also we assume that the number of these fleets that we can use changes over the time, and so does the rental cost. The second thing we consider is the impact of secondary disaster, and this impact is actually placed on the state of road network. And we model this network through a scenario tree. And the last contribution we have made is to use multiple stage stochastic programming model. Most relevant literature, they just use two-stage stochastic programming model. For multiple stage, it will create more computational challenges in this work. And we have also identified several directions for future research. The first thing is about carrier reliability. It means that when a disaster happens, sometimes the fleets are not available. So that's what we call carrier reliability. We want to integrate carrier reliability into the decision where the decisions we make for the relief distribution plan. And the second thing we want to consider is carrier selection criteria and some new types of constraints. So if you remember, I mentioned several times that the relief agencies, they do not own any trucks or fleets. They have to rent. So it is very important to that you have a good relationship with suppliers who can provide the fleets. So we also would like to explore like what kind of new types of constraints we can include it in the distribution plan so that different parties from the NGO side, from the private company side, we can share the risks and benefits. The last part is about depreciation costs. That's a cost we talk about to measure the suffering of the victim in a disaster. So when we make a relief distribution plan, it is important to keep the trade-off between deprivation cost and the economic cost. So yeah, 45 minutes. So that's the presentation I have today for my research work. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me, or you can send me an email. Okay. All right. Thank you. Any questions? I guess you probably have.
So I have less math problem, but more probably communicating with emergency responders. So what we found out is it's very hard to nail down very specific set of scenarios usually. And when you go and ask them what you think scenario is going to be, they give you very specific scenarios which you use for tabletop exercises, but they don't have this systematic way of approaching it and thinking, oh, that's all possible combinations of what can happen and that's how can happen. So it's very hard to extract those scenarios from them. And we basically have to sit down ourselves and imagine what, and we are not emergency response, so we've never seen emergency response operations. So for us, so it's like kind of disconnect between people who can think systematically and people who know, the main experts. And we find it very hard to communicate and very hard to formulate those problems because of this disconnect. So I wonder what's your experience.
Yeah, I totally agree with like last semester we have submitted several proposals just to Texas community because that RFP they requires you have community partners to deal with the disasters. I think that's like the issue that both people from academia and from industry or from the communities that they identify that we need a channel that we can talk with each other on the same page. So I think we are trying to working on this way already. Yeah, but I totally agree with your comment.
But in our case, actually, our project was funded by FEMA. And FEMA people had vested interest in the project. So it's not like we didn't have a channel to communicate. We had office in the FEMA in Chicago building. So we would go there on a regular basis and see it there. It's just it's not it's like we it's the way they think is very different. And we were not able to convert their thinking into mathematical model. That was the problem.
I see.
I think even if you have vested interest from their side, it doesn't solve the problem somehow. You have to be somehow creative how you extract knowledge from them. That's what
Yeah,
I'm saying.
I hear you. Like my limited experience, you try to start with simple models first, and then add different constraints and attributes to the model based on their needs. That's what I did when I was working at FedEx. Like I have to talk to people from sales, marketing, and even industry engineer, on-site industry engineer. They have no idea about optimization. So you have to come up with very simple example first to let them know what you want to solve, whether this is what they need. And then I think we need many rounds of communications to make sure the model actually solve the needs, the problem they want. So that's my limited experience. I don't know whether it can work here, but you definitely need to go to Chicago many times to figure out. Okay. Thank you for the comment.
So you consider the demand as fixed and never deterministic. So would you ever consider demand as stochastic, as an uncertain variable? So would that be directly embedded as scenarios according to those scenario trees?
It can work. It can work. The other way is like two level of stochastic programming models. We try to solve that model. We'll formulate the model first, but we figure out that it's a little bit hard to solve. So that's why we kind of just focus on the uncertainty in road network capacity, rather than like both capacity and the demand.
The other thing about this computational study, so when you solve with C flags, for those like number of quantities, they are supposed to be integer variables. Are you solving them? Are you solving the complex, the continuous relaxations there, or solving the integer variables?
This is the integer. This is the scenario specific scenarios. Sorry. Yes. This is the decision variables where most of them are integers and several of them are binaries. And when I talk about progressive hedging, that it helps us to kind of focus on the scenario-specific subproblems first. Did I answer your questions?
It's okay.
Would you mind repeating your question again?
Yeah, I think in your problem you have a series of integer variables, like the quantities of supplies on the items. So are you solving those variables as integer variables directly using syntax, or
Yes.
using solving continuous realizations? So you solve this?
Yeah, we take it just as integer decision variables. So if we go back to the first few slides I have, like to summarize the thing we want to do, compare with the existing literature. One thing we have here is, so we have the integer decision variables. That's also one of the reasons, one of the challenges regarding the computation solution. So, and I guess that's why most of the time they just use binary decision variables, because you can use simplex directly to solve them. But as I explained that, if you use binary decision variables, you actually only consider two extreme situations. You don't consider the changing in the between. So that's why we propose the integer decision variables. Any other questions?
Well, let's thank the speaker again.
My name is Zhijie, sorry, I didn't introduce myself.
So you are also a professor?
Yeah, I'm a here, but I spent 8 years in